A ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas has been delayed. Israel's national security advisor says no captives held in Gaza will be released before Friday. The deal was reached after weeks of negotiations mediated by Qatar alongside the United States and Egypt. It also remains unclear when the ceasefire will actually come into effect. It was initially expected to begin on Thursday morning. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the agreement with Hamas was a difficult but right decision. But he's made it clear he intends to continue the war and said the army will use the time to prepare for more fighting. In a moment, we'll speak to Mike Hanna in Washington, D.C. First, let's go to Hamda Salhut, who's in occupied East Jerusalem. So, Hamda, Israel says the release of hostages now won't happen before Friday. Do we know the reason for the delay?
Well, the Israeli government hasn't cited an exact reason for why there is a delay in this pause. The country's national security advisor, Hanna, released a statement saying that the captives will not be released until at least Friday at the earliest. But he says the conversations about their release are constant and they are ongoing all the time between government officials. Now, while the government has not given an exact reason for the postponement of the stop in the fighting, there have been several anonymous Israeli officials speaking to media saying that the fighting will not stop on Thursday, an indication that it will perhaps end on Friday, where we will see that 4-day pause. But there have been several leaks in Israeli media saying that there are still a couple of things that perhaps need to be finalized, that all parties, the negotiators and parties involved, haven't fully signed off on the deal. So we cannot confirm any of this information at this time because it has not come from the government itself. The Israeli Prime Minister, along with his war cabinet, speaking earlier in the evening, saying that this was the best decision for Israel and that the fighting, even after the pause, will continue at full force. But now, as of Thursday, the question remains not if it will be implemented, but when.
Now, for the families of the captives, this delay can't have been easy to hear about. What reaction has there been from them?
There's been a lot of reaction from the families of the captives on social media specifically, saying that they were actually notified of this via social media, really channeling their frustration to the public, saying that the government is not doing enough for them. I'll remind you that just a couple of days ago, the Israeli Prime Minister, along with his war cabinet, met with all of the representatives of the families of the captives in order to give them as much information and intelligence as he could. But it was the first time those families had received any information whatsoever since the beginning of the war. The frustration is mounting in several forms. They want to apply pressure on the Israeli government, specifically on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We've seen constant demonstrations from them, even marching from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, ending at the Prime Minister's office in hopes that it will relay a message to him that they are not really getting what they need from the government. So at this hour, there's a lot of reaction from those families, and all of it is seemingly negative because they're continuously frustrated and say that the government is not aiding them in their fight. It is not assisting them with more information on the captives. And when it comes to deals like this, they do want to be informed. And they're saying that they are learning everything from leaks, from the media, and not from official government sources to them, speaking directly to them. So another day of agony, really, for the families of the captives.
Thank you for that, Hamda Salhut, there for us in occupied East Jerusalem. Let's turn to Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Mike, the United States are very heavily involved in coming up with that ceasefire deal. We've been hearing that U.S. President Joe Biden has been speaking to a number of Middle East leaders. What's he been discussing?
Yes, those conversations took place earlier in the day before news of this apparent delay in the ceasefire came about. However, President Biden spoke to all the parties that had been involved in brokering this deal, He spoke to the Emir of Qatar, thanking him for the role that he played, the critical role he played in getting this deal closed. They also discussed the issue of humanitarian aid and the possibility that the influx of aid could increase in the window on the ceasefire when it begins. Then he also had a conversation with President Sisi of Egypt. President Biden telling the Egyptian president that the concept of refugees coming into Egypt was absolutely unacceptable. The U.S. position was that no refugees could be pushed out of Gaza into Egypt. He and President Sisi also discussed the humanitarian aid going into Gaza and, very importantly as well, discussing the terms of the ceasefire. President Sisi was central in terms of getting it done, but also he has a major role to play in getting the captives out once the release begin. Then President Biden also had a conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Once again, the details of the ceasefire and its implementation were said to be discussed. But President Biden also discussed with Prime Minister Netanyahu what happens after the ceasefire. The president saying very clearly his belief that Israel still has a duty to protect innocents even while it carries on its operations against Gaza after the ceasefire, when that ceasefire takes place.
Thank you for that, Mike Hanna in Washington, D.C.